The history of the brutal treatment of African slaves in the United States during the 18th and 19th centuries is widely known. However, few are aware of the existence of slavery in the Russian Empire, which was no less cruel, and possibly even more so, known as serfdom. During this period, the vast majority of the native population was essentially in a state of slavery under landowners. Today we will talk about the bloodiest landowner in Russian history, Daria Saltykova. Over 6 years, she caused the deaths and disappearances of more than 100 people. As a mother of 2, she turned the lives of her serfs into a nightmare, cruelly punishing them for seemingly minor offenses, such as poorly done house cleaning. On October 2, 1768, Catherine II approved the sentence of the most infamous landowner in history, Daria Saltykova. In the Russian Empire, Saltychika became a byword, symbolizing cruelty and bloody reprisals. Over 5 years, this noblewoman, who became a widow at the age of 25, brutally killed more than 100 serfs. In March 1730, the third daughter of nobleman Nikolai Ivanov was born and named Daria. Her maternal grandmother, Praskovia Davidova, lived in a monastery. There is very little information about Daria's childhood. However, an issue of the Russian Archive magazine from 1865 mentioned that she grew up in a devout family and deeply respected Orthodox traditions. She received a home education, but never learned to write. Contemporaries did not report any signs of mental illness in Daria during her childhood. However, it is possible that such evidence was either lost or that doctors simply failed to recognize clear warning signs. Interestingly, Daria's family was connected to prominent noble families, including the Musin-Pushkins, the Stroganovs, and the Tolstoys. Naturally, a suitor for their daughter was sought from the upper echelons of society. At the age of 19, she was married off to captain of the Life Guards Cavalry Regiment, Gleb Saltykov. It was said that her husband was unfaithful, while Daria stayed at home and raised their 2 sons, one born a year after the wedding and the other 2 years later. Her husband died under mysterious circumstances 5 years after their marriage. He fell ill with a fever and passed away suspiciously quickly within just a couple of weeks. After becoming a widow, Saltychika lived with her sons, Nikolai and Fyodor, in a house on Kuznetskaya Street in Moscow. She donated large sums of money to the church, either due to her devout nature or in an attempt to atone for something. The inconsolable widow was left with estates in the Moscow, Vologda, and Kostroma provinces, as well as an enormous fortune, including more than 600 serfs. The nightmare began approximately 6 months after Gleb Saltykov's death. Footmen and stable hands beat victims to death, following the initial torture inflicted by the landowner herself. After losing her husband, she began tormenting her serfs, beating them with rolling pins, sticks, whips, irons, and logs. She would burn hair directly on their heads, grab ears with heated tongs, and pour boiling water on their faces. Reported Russian Archive magazine, noting that all these horrors took place at the Troitskoye estate, now part of Moscow, where she moved with her sons. Her children, by the way, were unaware of what was happening. Saltychika's victims were most often young women. Minor mistakes like an improperly made bed, a poorly cleaned floor, or a dress not perfectly washed would provoke her wrath.
Beat them to death. I'll take full responsibility and fear no one. I'm even ready to give up my estates, but no one can do anything to me.
Saltychika shouted while punishing the serf Praskovia Larionova. Did the serfs try to take action? Yes. For instance, in the late 1750s, a stableman named Savily Martinov filed a complaint with the then-active state councilor Andrei Molchanov. Molchanov visited the landowner, but their meeting turned into casual conversations, the exchange of gifts, and reminders of her noble lineage, along with complaints about the stupidity of the peasants. Savily was not even removed from the estate.
They won't take me down for you, no matter how much you report,
Saltykova proudly declared. Attempts were also made to reason with her through the church. One peasant woman complained to a priest that the landowner had taken her 12-year-old daughter to work in the household, where she was beaten and abused. Stories circulated that Saltychika once gathered all the young women, locked them in an empty house, and starved them for 2 days, allegedly because they performed their duties poorly. However, the priest dismissed these accounts as nonsense at the time. He only remembered them when an investigation was conducted at Troitskoye by order of the Empress. She dealt with informers in a brutally harsh manner. First, she would negotiate with the authorities and beg them not to take the serfs away. But soon after, most of them would escape. Their tracks disappeared without a trace, and, strangely enough, no one ever searched for them. Serf Fyodor Bogomolov, like the other complainants, was returned to the estate. In Troitskoye, she chained him, posted guards, and starved him. In 1762, the victim of Saltychika's cruelty was serf Fyokla Gerasimova. Peasants later claimed that the skin was literally coming off her hands and feet, and she had no hair. It turned out that the serf had insufficiently cleaned the floor and washed the dress. The girl was beaten with a rolling pin and forced to redo the work. When the second attempt still didn't meet expectations, she was ordered to be beaten with sticks and made to redo everything again. At this point, the girl could barely stand. Her hair was pulled out, her skull was cracked, and her back was rotting, the peasants testified at the trial. The village elder of Troitskoye, Ivan Mikhailov, decided to send the lifeless body of Gerasimova to Moscow to the provincial office. Physician Fyodor Smirnov examined it and found numerous bruises and swellings. However, the case was not pursued. The girl was simply buried in an unmarked grave. One of the peasants, stableman Yermolai Ilyin, who reported Saltychika to the Empress, sought revenge for the deaths of his 3 wives. Saltychika had beaten Artemonova half to death with a rolling pin, then handed her over to peasants Peter Ulyanov and Mikhail Martinov to finish the job. Yakovleva and Semenova were beaten with sticks and scalded with boiling water. Saltychika was so confident in her impunity that after each death, she would approach Ilyin and say,
"Well, you'll go to file a complaint, but they won't find anything, and you'll be beaten as well."
Ilyin admitted that for a long time, he didn't dare to act because of fear. He was most afraid that he wouldn't be sent into exile, but would be returned to the landowner. Among Saltychika's victims, most were women, although she did make exceptions. For example, the peasant Karisan Andreev allegedly failed to supervise the girls who were washing the floors. The man was whipped nearly to death. Then the landowner handed him over to her executioners, a hussar and a stableman. Under their guard, Andreev spent the night in the cold, but that wasn't enough for Saltychika. She ordered that he be brought into one of the rooms and that heated tongs be used. The landowner beat her victim with a stick, poured boiling water on his head, and burned his ears with the tongs. When all this was uncovered, investigators were initially reluctant to believe that such horrors could have been carried out by a woman who had just turned 30 years old. Moreover, she was a mother. Saltychika never confessed to the murder. She claimed that the peasant had been whipped and then allegedly fled in an unknown direction. A similar fate befell the serf peasant girl, Maria Petrova. First, the landowner beat the girl with a rolling pin for poorly cleaning the floor, then handed her over to the hussar to be whipped. By evening, the girl had died, and instead of burying her, her body was taken into the forest and discarded. At the trial, when this case was discussed, Saltychika simply dismissed it.
In 1759, they brought this girl to me from the Vetluga estate. She was with me in Moscow. Then I sent her to Troitskoye with the hussar, but she took off and ran away.
The landowner was not particularly original in her excuses. The court did not believe her. Once, Saltychika nearly killed the grandfather of the famous Russian writer Fyodor Tyutchev. This story took place in early 1762. Saltychika became romantically involved with the engineer Nikolai Tyutchev. However, the man did not appreciate her fiery temper and decided to end the relationship. He proposed to Pelageya Tyutcheva, who accepted. The young couple began thinking about marriage, while Saltychika began contemplating murder. On the night of February 12th to 13th, she bought gunpowder and sulfur and sent the stableman Roman Ivanov to set fire to the house of her former lover. She insisted that the couple be inside so they could burn alive. However, the peasant, frightened by the thought of killing a nobleman, failed to carry out the order. For this, he was severely beaten. In the second attempt, the landowner sent 2 men, Ivanov and a certain Leontiev. But they returned to Saltychika, explaining that they couldn't kill the nobleman. The men were beaten with sticks, but they weren't killed. In the third attempt, she sent 3 serfs. The Tyuchevs were traveling to the Bryansk district to the bride's estate in Ovstug. The plan was for them to be ambushed on the way and beaten to death. However, someone warned the couple, and they took a different route. Rumors about the horrors in Troitskoye reached both Empress Elizabeth Petrovna and her successor, Peter III. However, it seems that the first chose not to punish the landowner due to her noble background. After all, both Saltychika's and her deceased husband's relatives had loyally served her father, Peter I. Peter III, on the other hand, simply didn't care about what was happening. He had his own amusements. Finally, in the summer of 1762, 2 serfs, Savly Martinov and his friend Yermolai Ilyin, managed to escape from Troitskoye. In fact, they had nothing to lose. Martinov had been ordered by the landowner to be beaten to death, and he miraculously managed to escape. His friend had lost 3 wives to her beatings. Why the Justice Collegium listened to them remains a mystery, as serfs not only had no voting rights, but were essentially considered property. However, the peasants were helped in composing a complaint, and it reached Catherine II, who had recently ascended the throne. She was crowned in July 1762. In the document, the men begged not to be returned to their landowner, as required by the law. The ruler demanded that the complaint be sent for review to the governing Senate and then to the Justice Collegium in Moscow. The investigation was led by the court advisor Stepan Volkov and the young prince Dmitry Tsitsianov. The serfs themselves described over 100 murders, claiming that every week a new grave appeared behind the church on the grounds of Troitskoye. From the fall of 1762 to the fall of 1763, members of the Collegium interrogated Saltychika herself, as well as peasants, stablemen, and servants. Out of 100 interrogated, 94 admitted to the abuse and deaths of serfs. However, no one could name the total number of victims. As a result, the verdict was delivered. The widow is to be tortured. Saltychika, however, never confessed to any crime, even though records listed people who had supposedly died as runaways. Those who had visited her home recalled seeing beaten people, but what noblemen would have paid attention to? Serfs. The investigation and trial lasted 6 years. The verdict for Saltychika was delivered in 1768. A total of 138 people were listed as runaway, dead from disease, or supposedly missing. The serfs admitted that she had killed no fewer than 75 people. 38 murders were proven. For 26, there was not enough evidence, and 11 of her cases were dismissed. It's worth noting that Darja Saltykova committed these acts over a span of 6 years. At least 3 verdicts were made in her case: execution, exile, and imprisonment. Catherine II personally decided on imprisonment. The sentence was announced on October 2, 1768. Darja Saltykova was called a torturer, a murderer, and a monster of humanity. The Empress even forbade referring to her as a woman and ordered that she be addressed only as he. Her noble title was also stripped. For 1 hour, she was chained to a pillory with a sign that read, "Torturer and Murderer," after which she was sent to the dungeon of the Ivanovsky Monastery, where she was forbidden to speak to anyone except the guards and a nun. In 1779, she was moved to a stone annex and allowed to communicate with visitors. Many were eager to see her. However, her sons never came to visit her throughout the entire time. Darja Saltykova died on November 27, 1801, at the age of 71, having spent more than 30 years in captivity. Today, we looked at just one case among many cruel acts during the era of serfdom. This happened in Moscow, but imagine what was occurring in provincial towns and districts, where cruelty was likely even more widespread, though not always documented. After all, a significant portion of the population in the country were serfs. Brutal treatment of people in the 18th to 19th centuries occurred not only based on race and not only in the USA, but also in other countries and continents. Friends, thank you for watching the video until the end. Please like and subscribe, as your support helps promote the video.